So today we're looking at some Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st Edition again, and this time I'm going to explore a rarely asked question, which is going to be about hirelings, specifically sages. Looking at the hirelings, what's available and so on, characters are able to find whatever type of occupation that might be available to them for hiring, short-term, long-term, or when they get their lairs and strongholds, permanent basis. And what this includes is you've got standard hirelings, apparently, like link boys and limners, and teamsters, which are good for carrying things, but then expert hirelings, which include alchemists for potions, lots of mercenaries, jewelers, gem makers, armorers, and sages. Now, sages must have been important to Mr. Gygax. He devoted almost 2 full pages to the overall sage profession. So the question comes in, it's rarely asked, what are we doing that for? How often do we need to consult a sage? And for most players, should I be consulting sages more often? So just as a brief, I should say, start, they're a very special case, for they are the encyclopedia, computers, the expert opinions, and demi-oracles of the milieu all rolled into one. So with that, you're looking at sages being specialists in various fields and then generalists in others. And there's a nice little explanation about how their minor fields and specialty categories work. And essentially what we're looking at is when you are looking at employing a sage, you're looking for one with a very specific personality or very specific knowledge, I suppose, is probably more important. And then it's a matter of, okay, once I've found my sage, what does this thing do? What does this class or occupation do? So with the major field, you're looking at choosing one of these particular categories. You can roll, but you can also choose. Basically, the characters will be looking for a sage of some description. So they'll be looking for someone who's a specialist in magic items, in politics, in a particular race or an area or something just more mystical. So the categories, I'll take the categories please. You'll have humankind, which is art, music, biology, etc. Demi-humans. So clearly humankind is the general history of, say for instance, Greyhawk Oath with the usual history. And then demi-humankind would refer to the elves, dwarves, goblins, halflings. Character races are often listed as demi-humans. Humanoids and giant kind, which are orcs, hobgoblins, goblins, etc. Physical universe, which has more of the sciences. Fauna, critters, flora, plants. And you might be saying, why wouldn't I just go to a druid? Well, just because you're a druid and you can identify some of these things, to have a specific need for, you might be after a particular anti-poison or poison or something, you may go to a sage and you may not have a druid on hand. So you have to find someone who's next best thing. Supernatural and unusual. Planes, medicines, heraldry, there you go. Divination and so on. So a sage is usually a human, not always, but most often a human who has specialized in a field of study. And this is where we do a side note to sort of explain that in the Gygaxian view of D&D, humans generally focus on one task at a time, or one specialty, or one precious moment, whereas the demi-humans who live for 400 or 500 years, They may not. They may sort of spread themselves afield. So this is all related to the human sage. So it wouldn't be out of the question for there to be maybe 2 fields of study. Or if we're looking at this chart here, when it says special categories in a major field, maybe additionals for an wizened elf, and maybe additional minor fields. So basically, when you're a specialist in a field, you may choose to find something in the supernatural and unusual. You may have 2 of these. It might be heraldry and, let's say, medicine, just for saying. So heraldry and medicine, but then they might have a general knowledge in 3 of these other fields, and it might be humankind, demi-humankind, and maybe humanoids, giant kind, which may or may not work with their heraldry and medicines, but that's what they know specifically. And then you've got general feelings of those. Depending on what the characters need, depends on how long it should take, is that success. Oftentimes, we're talking about a few rounds if it's a simple question, but it's days if it's something that's more exacting. And then we've got a cost. There's always a cost. In GPs, a sage costs a lot of money. So if you're planning on hiring one on a full-time basis, you have to give them a lifetime gig. They automatically start with tenure, and they need enough space to be able to put all their books. So you've got to work that out as well. So when you have your stronghold, and you might think, hey, it'd be nice to have a sage hanging around. Yeah, there you go. That's what happens. So the actual sage you can hire temporarily, or you can hire on a permanent basis. And the question comes back, what does a character need a sage for? Well, if they've got a magic item that they need to try and find something more about, or if they want to have a deep dive into a political sphere and they want to know a little bit more about the family tree or just some of the extra knowledge. In terms of a module or a one-shot, probably not. But if you're in a campaign, having a sage on speed dial is kind of a nice way of just moving forward. If you can deal with short-term employment, they just cost a lot. 100 gold piece per day, plus their fees, plus. So you're looking at thousands in that regard. Long-term employment, you're looking at tens of thousands, because they're needy sort of people who love their books and they need their space, and they have lots of research that they need to get on with, which is all part of it. And of course we have what is our sage, and again we're looking at a human sage, and we have some base stats for our sage and a basic alignment. So these are all parts that the DM gets to play with a little bit. Obviously, if someone's in the evil alignments, a little bit more selfish. In good alignments, then they're going to be wanting to work toward a betterment. If they're neutrally aligned, they may not carry the weight. It's about the knowledge itself. Then obviously lawful, chaotic, and neutral for the whether it's for the balance of the law and order. It's kind of important to note that sages have some magical ability, but they're not magical characters. So they might have some spell-like abilities, but they're not the same as a magic user in the way that they handle it. Obviously the training and the discipline of being a magic user versus reading lots of books and knowing stuff is totally different. So a sage will have levels of spells available to them, which is d4 plus 2. So between levels 3 and 6, spells available, and they'll have 1 to 4 spells at each level. They can't add to that, and they can only cast 1 spell per day, and they have to have every spell has to be cast from their book. So it's not like they've got the same Vancian mechanism inside their minds. They need to have their study books with them, and they need to be able to rest a lot to be able to use this spell. There are some spells that are not available, and basically depending on this, depends on what type of spells they have. They'll either be cleric, or druid, magic user, or illusionist spells. They won't have a blend, unless you want them to have a blend, but they will have, they might be more magic user based if they've got more like the physical universe. Sorry, how do they explain it in here? They've got a small description in here. Physical universe, the clerical talents, there you go. So science is a clerical talent. Okay, fair enough. I forgot about that. And the supernatural and unusual, your magic user. So metaphysics is a magic user thing. Flora and fauna are druidic, and so on. So when you've got your spell list that you're choosing them from, they get a D4 plus 2 for the level, and they get 1 to 4 spells. The level they cast that spell is the minimum level to actually use that spell. So if they've got a 3rd level spell, magic user, that is a 5th level spell. They'll cast it as a 5th level. If they've got a 1st level spell, they'll cast it as a 1st level. So that's basically how it works, because they're peeling it straight out of their books. They're not actually learning it, and it's not something that grows with them. It's very much the base spell effect. So when we've got our sage, the players have decided that they want to know more and understand more about the history of an area or the land or a personality, and they can't find a bard, or the bard doesn't know, and the magic user can't find it in their own little library or in the local library in the city. Then it's time to consult with a sage. You have to find one which will be attached to either the central political structure or a university or an education learning center or something, and then would have to come in with the pitch on why they should be helped. Then it comes down to how well they can help and how long it takes. Then the players have to figure out what they're going to do between that time. So if you're looking at implementing something like Tomb of the Lizard King in your adventure series, like in your campaign, that might be something that's worthwhile in them researching, consulting the sage to look at the history of the area or the general tomb. They might get a bit more of an idea of what they're after and not hit that TPK so early. As a side note, my guys hit that TPK twice, and both at the same time, at the same spot both times. So, Tomb of the Lizard King, it's a good one. Every time when the sage does something, they've got to recover. So you can't ask them a question and then expect them to do it again the next day. They need to have a couple of days to discover it. And you can determine that the length of time, as defined by down here, is longer if you want to. So if you want to query it, especially like an artifact or something that requires them to have a bit more of a deep dive, so they find the one ring and you got to go scrolling all the way back to Minas Tirith through that deep library, you may not come back for much longer than even 40 days. It might be closer to 100 days, if at all. Sage can be like Gandalf, Obi-Wan Kenobi. So these are classic mentor type characters as well. Miracle Max from The Princess Bride. Always worth a Princess Bride reference if we can throw one in there. But basically we're talking about lots of GPs to learn things and to do things. How these get used is going to be entirely up to the DM making them accessible, and also the players realizing they need to ask for help. And that's sometimes where it can go wrong, because players like to think that they're superheroes that need to know how everything works themselves. And basically that's not how it really is. There's always someone in the background providing something. When the characters get to the point of having their own stronghold, that's a topic that we'll cover in a little bit more in depth, because there's a lot to do with that. There's a lot to do. But in terms of the permanency of having a sage, it's always important to know only, here it is, only fighters, paladins, rangers, thieves and assassins are able to hire a sage. Everyone else can consult, but they're the only ones that can hire one and have one as a permanent fixture. And what they need to do is work out where the sages are located: colleges, schools, universities, libraries, museums, various fora, and also attached to many of the agencies that the local governments will have. They'll have a sage on hand to be able to provide them with information about their neighbours and enemies. So what we do after all of that, there's a lot of text on all of this, and it is well worth the read. I'm not going to go through all of it. The cheap notes are simply that tons of experience, tons of gold to be spent, and they expect a lot of gold every year. When you pick one up, it takes days. The accuracy of the discovery is also important, and if they know it, then how much is what they know and how much of it is kind of bluff. But a lot of these are set up directly for the DM to adjudicate. They're not an actual chart as such. They give some examples, and that's exactly how it's described in here. But you can use the numbers as they are in here. The question is of a general nature. The sage will hedge and talker answering the question, and there is no cost involved as the day was not spent. Were it specific and he required more, 13 to 24 days, then you would still spend per day anything from $650 to $1,200 for that time, and so on, even though the guy knew he wasn't going to answer it. Yes, so you need to make sure that you know what they're going to be able to answer for you. So get references. That's always the thing on that one. All of this is based on the human sage. So as we said, the non-human sage and dwarf, elf, gnome, halfling will all have slightly different special research and what they do and how much they cost, as well as what their expectations are. When it comes to most hirelings of non-human nature, they generally only stick around for a year, but we'll see how you want to do that with the sage. Hit points, 8d4 plus any con bonuses if you're lucky. Constitution 2d6 plus 3. So if you're lucky. So basically what we're looking at here is between about 20 hit points. They're not the sort of folks that go running around the dungeons with you. If you drag one with you, then your peril, and also they will probably demand a lot more protection, and you'll be spending money on mercenaries likely. So anyway, alright, so this was a little bit on the Sage, and basically it's just time and money, which is like most consultants. But the players shouldn't be discouraged from consulting with these, and Gygax puts a lot of effort into talking about them. So whether or not his players did that a lot, or something he did and he put all this aside and no one ever used, I don't know, but there's a lot here to think about. So maybe that's something that should be explored. And that might be something that you can just say, oh look, if you need to find a Sage, find a Sage. It's worth noting, when it comes to expert hirelings, this is something that the player characters have to deal with themselves. No expert hireling wants to deal with the middlemen as such. When you're just doing standard hirelings, you can tell your hench person to just go and grab 10 or 15 teamsters for hauling stuff, or find me a new tailor, or go and get a link boy or something. We need some lanterns carried, leatherworkers, carpenters, masons. Some of these are considered standard hirelings. Valets, we love a good valet, or lackey, get a lackey. Then when it comes to the expert hirelings, the PCs have to find them and sort them out themselves. So these are the guys that have a little bit more extra grunt, and that's why when we're doing our Sage work, you're not going to leave it in the hands of your henchmen. You're going to go out and talk to them directly, because you need to know that they actually are what you want them to become. So, how to use a Sage? Sages can be great as a general hook. The Sage has called the party together to go and get a thing that proves his theory or something. But obviously they're more famous for being available for the players to use, which means that the players have to actually have a need to use some of these things. So are they going to need to do a Sage to understand the theology and myth of humanoids? Just general flora and fauna, the supernatural stuff and specials. Basically, you have to give them the reason to have to come and ask someone for help. So, the day of Black Sun is coming. What does that mean exactly? Well, they can try and research it themselves, or they can probably go find a Sage who will just have a calendar and it's this date. But that's something that you can do. Same thing with oceanography. If they're planning on doing a sea adventure, they might want to know a little bit more about the region that they're about to jump into. But again, that's part of it, more campaign oriented, but it's still something that's interesting. Once they've tapped a Sage for information a couple of times, then you can sort of generate a bit more of a Rolodex of contacts. And when they move to a different place or town, one Sage can say, go and talk to my colleague at the university. You may have to butter him up with something a bit more, but he should help you. And that's where the alignments come in. Not everyone's just going to be wanting to do it out of the goodness of their heart. They'll want some cash, or they've got other reasons to do it. Yeah, sure, let me come and join you on your quest to this temple, because they've been researching how to unlock the evil for the last 50 years, and now that you've found the temple, they want to come and help unlock it. That sort of thing. It does happen in various tropes across the board, but it's all fun and games. So hopefully I've answered a question that nobody's ever asked. Well, as I say, it's less asked. So what I will want to do is just sort of make a reminder to everyone that, yep, enjoy, like, subscribe, and so on. And whether or not you've used sages in your games and ability games and campaigns, outside of what was just in a standard module, on occasion the characters are brought together by them. But if you like what you see, then please continue to enjoy viewing. And if there's something you want me to look at, then I shall. Alright, well, thank you very much for your time and patience. This is just a quick one, just a single, rarely asked question. And we'll see you again.